Hello and very welcome everyone to this session of the Modern History Part 7th. In today's session, we are going to discuss some other topics related to the modern history that had not been covered so far. So far, we have covered a lot of topics regarding the independence era, regarding the movements, regarding the social and religious reforms, and now let's see what we have further. So before we start, the images used in the slide deck are for educational purpose only. We respect the intellectual property rights of the original creators and owners of these images. If you are the owner of any of the images used in this deck and have any concerns or issues, please contact us at sathee@iitk.ac.in and we shall remove the images. So first one that we have today is about the constitutional, administrative and judicial development. So in today's session, we are going to discuss the developments done in the constitutional phase, in the administrative phase, and the judicial phase, that is the judiciary phase, after the British conquered or expanded themselves in our territory. So first thing that we have today is constitutional development between 1773 and 1858. So the first thing that we have is Regulating Act of 1773. So the Regulating Act was passed in the British Parliament in June 1773. It was first parliamentary ratification and authorization defining the power and authority of the East India Company with respect to its Indian possessions. So if we talk about the Regulating Act of 1773, guys, then you must know one thing. First of all, that in 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad was signed. And after the Treaty of Allahabad was signed with the Shah Alam II. Basically, there were two treaties of Allahabad signed. One was with Shuja-ud-Dawla, that is the Nawab of Awadh, and one was with the Shah Alam II. When the treaty was signed with Shah Alam II, so one thing was defined, that is the dual system was introduced in our country, basically in Bengal, Bihar and Odisha. And if we talk about that system, so Diwani of Bengal, Bihar and Odisha was given to the Britishers. What is the meaning of Diwani? So Diwani means the power to collect the revenue in these areas are given to the Britishers. And that remained till 1773. Basically in 1773, the British monarchy or the British government passed the Regulating Act to control the system of East India Company that is working in our country, that is working in different places in India. And also you can understand it with the word regulation. So it is a kind of a regulation that was put on the East India Company, and that defined the authority and the power of East India Company in India's possessions. So I hope it is all clear. And this particular act came during the time when Warren Hastings was the Governor General of Bengal. Basically, he was the Governor of Bengal, but through this act of Regulating Act of 1773, he was made the Governor General of Bengal. So do remember, he was the first Governor General of Bengal. Also, under this Regulating Act, a lot of different type of things were added, like the first Supreme Court of our country was established later in 1774, and that was established in Calcutta. And the first Chief Justice of that Supreme Court was Eliza Impe. And do remember that Supreme Court has the power to take the judgments regarding the functions of East India Company and not the whole country. Then comes the provisions of the Act. So it introduced the element of centralized administration. It did not take over the power completely, hence regulated. As I was saying, so the power was not taken completely by the British monarch or the British government, but it was a kind of a regulation that was started. As per this, Warren Hastings appointed as the Governor General of the Presidency of Fort Williams. The Supreme Court was established at Calcutta. Judges were from England. It had civil and criminal jurisdiction over the British subjects and not the Indian natives, as I was saying. Governor General has control over the councils of Bombay and Madras, and that is why the Governor General of Bengal position was created, as he was particularly governing the governors of Bombay and Madras as well. So that was all done under the 1773 Regulating Act. And do remember the court of directors were also created, and the powers of East India Company were extended for the next 20 years. That means from 1773 to 1793. Then, in between these 20 years, came the Pitt's India Act 1784. Let's read about it. So this act resulted in dual control of British possession in India by British government and company with final authority resting with the government. So basically, after the Regulating Act came in 1773, and Warren Hastings was the Governor General of Bengal, he became the Governor General of Bengal. There were a lot of bribery and different type of corruptions going on at that time. Because of which, what happened is that in 1784, the Pitt's India Act was introduced. At that time, the British Prime Minister was William Pitts, and because of which the act was named Pitt's India Act. And it was a kind of an amendment or emolument in the Regulating Act of 1773. The company became a subordinate department of the state. It introduced Board of Control, who in charge of civil, military, and revenue affairs, Court of Directors to trading activity. So in 1773 Act, I told you that Court of Directors were introduced. So earlier, the Court of Directors had all the powers of trading as well as revenue and creating policies. But now the Board of Control is also introduced, which have the power to introduce the civil, military, and revenue affairs. And on the other side, the Court of Directors of trading activity. So that was Pitt's India Act. And do remember, it was a kind of an amendment in the 1773 Regulating Act. Then comes the Act of Settlement, 1786. And we just need to learn about it. So Governor General of Bengal Presidency was given veto. Madras and Bombay Presidency became subordinate. So Warren Hastings was doing a lot of corruption, and there was a lot of corruption and bribery was going under his Governor Generalship. So as soon as the British government got to know about that, they particularly removed the Warren Hastings. Remember, Warren Hastings was the only Governor General of Bengal who was impeached, or the process of impeachment was introduced against him. So after that, some different type of settlements were also done. As we can see that the Governor General of Bengal Presidency was given veto, and Madras and Bombay presidencies became subordinates. The Charter Act of 1793. And why this veto was given? Because Cornwallis wanted that, the new Governor General that was to be introduced into the Indian subcontinent. So the Act continued company's trade monopoly in India for 20 more years. That means up to 1813. Governor General was given more power to override his council decision. As I was saying, that this time the Cornwallis became the Governor General, and he wanted a lot of powers in his hand, and that is why you can see that the Governor General was becoming powerful at this time. The revenue administration was separated from the judiciary functions, and this led to disappearing of mal adalats. So that time was the Act of Settlement of 1786, and after that the Charter Act of 1793 also came. And do remember, this act added some particular power to the hands of the Governor General of Bengal. Then comes the Charter Act of 1813. Very important, guys. So this act renewed the EIC charter for another 20 years. That means the East India Company's power over the Indian possession has been again increased for another 20 years. That means up to 1833, the East India Company will keep on controlling the administration of this country. It defined for first time constitutional position of British Indian territories. So this is the first time when the British Indian territories were recognized and the constitutional position was defined. Because why? Because we know that from 1803 to 1805, the Second Anglo-Maratha War was fought. After that, in 1809, the treaty was signed with Raja Ranjit Singh. And because of all these things, the territory of Britishers are now known to the every person in this country. And that is why this is the first time that Britishers were defining their territories controlled. The company's monopoly with trade ended except for trade in tea and with China. This is also really important, guys. Um, Remember one thing, that by the as the time passes away, so the British Raj or the British government that is in Britain, they are basically taking the control of different type of things of British East India Company. Basically, there was also the time when in Europe, because of the dispute going on with the Napoleon Bonaparte, the traders are not able to trade with different European countries. So this was the time that the British traders, that are different from East India Company, had to be introduced into the Indian market. And at that time, basically, the monopoly of British East India Company was going on. So British Raj or British government declared that the monopoly of British East India Company ended in India, but except two very important things. One is the trade with China and trade in tea. So except these two things, the other merchants who are coming to India, they can trade in other particular important things. So that was the time of 1813 Charter Act. The regulation made by the Council of Madras, Bombay and Calcutta were now required to be laid before the British Parliament. This act allowed Christian missionaries to preach their religion. This is also really important, guys, that now the Christian missionaries are being sent by Britishers as well. Earlier, we know that Portuguese were the one who introduced the Christian missionaries. Then France was also introducing Christian missionaries. Britishers took time. First, they took the control of administration, they took the control of revenue, and now they are introducing the Christian missionaries in Indian territory. It allocated 1 lakh rupees for Indian education and allowed Christian missionaries to teach English and their religion. So this is another very important thing, that the rupees 1 lakh rupees are put aside for the education provided to the Indians, so that their modern education could be given to the Indians of our country. And also the Christian missionaries are made responsible to teach English and as well as their religion. So this was an important act of 1813, and again that for 20 years the power of East India Company was extended till 1833. Then comes the Charter Act of 1833, very important, guys. So it was also called the Government of India Act of 1833 or St. Helena Act of 1833. This act made EIC exclusive administrative body, and basically at that time the Governor General of Bengal was William Bentinck, and under this act the Governor General of Bengal will now be called the Governor General of India. Trade link with China was also ended. So now the monopoly was completely ended. In 1913 we saw that the monopoly remained with the trade with China and trade in tea. But now is the time that both the monopolies are ended, and now every particular merchant who is coming into India can trade in anything. So here we can see again that as the time passes, the government of Britain is taking the control of most of the things of the East India Company and taking away most of the authorities that they had earlier. The act legalized the British colonization of the country. The position of Governor General of Bengal, redesignated as the Governor General of India, Lord William Bentinck became the first Governor General of India. Remember this point, this is very important. Slavery was abolished by this act. So slavery was also abolished in our country under this act. So some type of reforms were also coming. Then comes the 1853 Charter Act. But before that, I need to tell you one more point that is not added here. So that is the first law member was also added under the 1833 Charter Act into the Council of Governor General of India. And the first law member, the first person who became the law member of the Governor General Council was basically called the Lord Macaulay. I hope you have heard this name, Lord Macaulay. Lord Macaulay is responsible for introducing English education into our country and creating a particular law commission as well. So do remember his name. Now let's move to Charter Act of 1853. So the act ended patronage system to civil services, means to say that earlier there was a time that the Indians were not allowed into the Indian Imperial Civil Services, but now under 1853 Charter Act, the Imperial Civil Services doors were now open for Indians as well. And as soon as these doors were opened, so we found that in 1863-64, Satyendra Tagore became the first Indian who cleared the exam of ICS, that is Imperial Civil Services. This act appointed separate Governor General of Bengal Presidency from the Governor General of India. Remember this point also, that under 1853 Charter Act, now the Governor General of India is separated from the Governor General of Bengal or the Governor of Bengal. The legislative wing came to be known as the Indian Legislative Council. And apart from that, do remember one more very important point, guys, that in 1853 Charter Act, the time period was not given for the first time. In all the other acts that we have read so far, Regulating Act 1773, Charter Act 1893, 1813, 1833, in all those acts, we came to know that 20-year time was given. But in Charter Act of 1833, in 1853, no time was given. That means that it will be soon an end of the East India Company in our country, and it will at any time the British Raj will take over from the East India Company. And that happened in Government of India Act 1858. So it shifted from company rule to crown rule, as I was saying. So as soon as the 1857 revolt happened, Queen Victoria asked the East India Company that what you are doing in this country. Are you here to create massacre or to do some trade? So on the basis of these particular points, the crown rule or the British Raj particularly replaced the East India Company. All the officials of East India Company are now becomes the officials of British Raj who are working on the behalf of British Raj. And the Governor General of India has now become the Viceroy of India on the behalf of British Raj. It changed designation from Governor General to Viceroy, as I was saying. A new Secretary of State in British Parliament to supported Indian Council. Lord Canning was the first Viceroy, and he was also the one under whose time the revolt of 1857 happened. Do you remember at this time the Queen of Britain was Queen Victoria, and Government of India Act 1858 started the British Raj in our country, and now all the things that are happening in our country are based on 1858 Government of India Act, and later it was replaced by the Indian Independence Act of 1947. Also, I would like to add one more point that along with the Viceroy, the other position that was created in our country at that time was Secretary of State. So that is why further we came to know about different type of acts with the name like Morley Minto, Montague Chelmsford, because these are named after the Secretary of State and Viceroy of our country. And these are the things that are happening at that time. And now from 1858 onwards, the British Raj is directly ruling our country. And now the Queen of Britain will now be called the Empress of India. And who was the first one? That was Queen Victoria. Then comes the Indian Council Act of 1861. So the portfolio system introduced by Lord Canning led the foundation of cabinet government in India. So basically, as soon as the 1861 came, so Lord Canning was the viceroy at that time, and this is the time that Britishers also started adding some Indians into the legislative system of the country. But before that, the portfolio system was introduced and the foundation of cabinet government was laid. That means the government is formed in India also, apart from the British government. The Secretary of State for India in Britain could also dissolve any act passed by the Governor General Council. So as I was saying, that Secretary of State was another position created along with the Viceroy, and he has a kind of a veto power that if any kind of act that is created by the Governor General Council, or you can say the Viceroy's Council, can be dissolved by the Secretary of State who is in Britain. So do remember 1861, and do remember one more thing, that now under the Viceroy there are two types of councils. One is the Executive Council and another one is the Legislative Council. And in Legislative Council in 1861 Indian Council Act, for the first time 3 members were added into the council as a nominated members by the Viceroy, and those 3 members were Sir Dinkar Rao, Raja of Banaras, and Maharaja of Patiala. These were the 3 people who were added as a nominated members into the Viceroy's Legislative Council. So do remember that as well. So no election procedure was given to the Indians, but nominations were given. Then comes the Indian Council Act of 1892. So Indian National Congress was formed in 1885, and there was growing feeling of nationalism, and this led that INC put forth demand to British authorities. Demand was to reform legislative council. So as I told you earlier in 1861, that 3 members were added as a nominated members. But now, as we know, that in 1885 the Indian National Congress was formed, and Indian National Congress was not just a kind of a safety valve, according to the theories, but also the members of this party or this particular association were asking a lot of particular things that should be done in favor of the Indians. So, because of which, in 1892, some particular demands are put forward to the British authorities, and some legislative reform should be done according to the demands. It increased the non-official members to the council in 1894. Out of 24, only 5 were Indians. So now, as I was saying about the non-official members or nominated members, so now the number of members of Indians to be increased in the council, basically in the Legislative Council. This act gave right to ask question on budget, but could not ask supplementary question. So this was the first time that the Indians were given a right that they can ask a particular question on budgets, but not some spontaneous questions they can ask or supplementary questions they can ask. This act empowered the Legislative Council to make law and repeal old law with permission of Governor General. So as I was saying, till now, the Indian can only be the member of Legislative Council, but the Legislative Council can now make laws and also repeal old laws, but that too with the permission of Governor General. That means Indians are not free here to repeal any law that was made earlier. If they are making any law, they need to permission of the Governor General. After his approval, only the older laws can be repealed and new laws can be added. So here you can see that we are still not getting the demands fulfilled. So this was the 1892 Indian Council Act. Then comes 1909 Indian Council Act, very important, famously known as Morley-Minto reforms. So it was popularly known as the Morley-Minto reforms. The act made the first attempt to bring in a representative and popular element in the governance of the country. Morley was the Secretary of State and Minto II was the Viceroy at that time. The strength Legislative Council at center and provinces was increased. Central 16 to 60 members and provincial level 50 members. So basically, let me tell you it in a simple way. So at central level, we have 2 councils under Viceroy. One is the Executive Council, which is the main council in which all the special positions or ministers are Britishers. And on the other side, we have a Legislative Council in which at the center, the Indians can become the member. Now, on the other side, let us go on the other side. So in the provinces means the states at that time. So the number of members were increased to 50 members. The number of members in the provinces at that time could be 50, but that too in the Legislative Council only. Okay, so I hope you can now understand that Legislative Council is the council which has no power at all. Another point. This was the first time when under 1909 Indian Council Act, first time a member or an Indian member was added into the Executive Council of Viceroy, and that particular member was Satyendra Prasad Sinha. Remember that name. So the elected member would be elected indirectly. The members could discuss budget and move resolution and ask supplementary questions. So their power of asking questions and moving the resolutions was also increased. Satyendra Prasad Sinha was as the first Indian member to Viceroy's Executive Council. As I was telling you, Governor General had veto power. The introduction of separate electorate for Muslims. This is really important, guys. These 2 points are really important. First is I already told you about Satyendra Prasad Sinha. And now another point is the separate electorate for Muslims. So let me tell you a story behind this, brief story. So basically, on one side, we know that INC or Indian National Congress was taking a lot of things into their hand, like asking for Swaraj, asking for different type of rights, asking for to fulfill different type of demands to the Britishers. But on the other side, the Muslim segment of Indian subcontinent were basically on different path, and in 1906 they created the All India Muslim League. This All India Muslim League was basically creating this league, and in that particular scenario, what they were doing was they wanted a separate state. So basically, the ideology of a separate state was created earlier also during the time of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and now it is evolving. And in 1906, with the development of Muslim League, the Britishers are getting that now we are successful in creating the divide and policy, introducing the divide and policy rule. So, as a gift to the Muslim segment, they introduced a separate electorate for Muslims, under which the Muslims will now be considered as a minority, and there will be separate electorate, which means that their seats will be defined in the country, in which only the Muslim candidate can vote, and the Muslim candidate can become a candidate, and also only the Muslim voters can vote. So that is the basic meaning of separate electorate at that time. So Governor General had veto power. This is another point added under this act. The introduction of separate electorate for Muslims. So you can see, as soon as they are increasing the number of members of Indians into any kind of council in executive and legislative, they are also increasing their power 2 times. Like if they have introduced us the power that we can ask questions for supplementary questions and move resolution. So they have already increased their own power, that they have added the veto power to the Governor General. So that if we Indians do something that is not in favor of them, so they can directly use the veto power and can suppress that particular law. Then comes the Government of India Act 1919. So the act is known as the Montague-Chelmsford Reforms. The act provides for increasing Indian in every branch of administration with due progressive devolution of responsible government. So if we talk about the Montague-Chelmsford reforms, guys, this time the Montague was the Secretary of State and Chelmsford was the Viceroy. And let me tell you a brief story behind this also. So from 1914 to 1918, the First World War was going on. And when this war was started and Britishers were fighting this war against Germany and allied powers, so particularly Britishers came to India and they asked for help. And also for them, Gandhiji also advocated to help Britishers. And that is why Gandhiji got the name as a recruiting sergeant. Later, they also promised us that they will provide Swaraj, they will provide dominion status as soon as the First World War would end. So basically, they provided a promise, but they will not fulfill it. That we definitely know. So now we need to see that what they had done in this particular act. So this act provides for the increasing Indians in every branch of administration and due to progressive devolution of responsible government. So they were trying to tell us that they are increasing the number of Indians, but they were not giving any kind of power. You can see further. So diarchy was introduced at provincial level by this act. The subjects were divided to reserved and transferred. So now try to understand this. So under the Viceroy, there were two councils. One is the legislative, one is the provincial council. Majorly, the Indians are the members of legislative council only and not the executive council. Okay, I hope this point is clear. Now, if we talk about the powers, so earlier we have the power to ask questions, we have the power to ask the we had the power to move the resolution, we had the power to ask questions on budget. But now, as they promised us to give dominion status or Swaraj according to us, what they are doing, they are now providing some of the subjects to us on which only the Indians can create law in the legislative council. And that is why, as you can see, that there are two types of government working. So that is why this process is called diarchy. Now I think this point is clear. So two types of lists were created at that time. One is the reserved and one is the transferred. And I think you have got the message of the Britishers. Reserved list is that list under which the Britishers can create the laws. And obviously, Britishers had kept all the important portfolios with them only. And transferred is the subjects on which the Indians can create the laws. And these are not very important subjects. The Indian Legislative Council at the center was replaced by the bicameral system. The principle of communal representation was extended with separate electorate for Sikhs, Christians, and Anglo-Indians, besides Muslims. 25% of the budget was subject to vote, rest was not non-votable. Here you can see once again that if they are increasing our power, they are increasing their power 2 times or 4 times every time. Okay. And on the other side, the separate electorate for Muslims was also created in 1919 in 1909 Council Act. I hope you remember. Now in 1919, the separate electorate was also given for Sikhs and Christians and Anglo-Indians. The act provides for the first time to establish of Public Service Commission in India. And I would like to add one point here that after this act was particularly came in 1919, this act was the provisions of this act was passed in 1921 completely, and after that the Lee Commission was created, and on the basis on the recommendation of Lee Commission, the Public Service Commission was created in our country, which was responsible for taking the exams, for particularly taking the exams in Indian subcontinent only. Earlier, the candidates had to go to Britain to give the ICS exam, but now they can also give the ICS exam in India only. And the commission that was responsible for creating the scenario for this type of exam was Lee Commission, and that was created under the 1919 Government of India Act. Now let's read further. We have to discuss about the 1935 Government of India Act, but before that, we must know about Simon Commission also. So Simon Commission 1927. So recommendations we must know. It abolished diarchy. So first recommendation that they gave, that we should abolish the diarchy, that was introduced at the center in 1919 Government of India Act. It extend responsible government in the provinces. Let me tell you a story behind this. So in 1919 Government of India Act, one provision was also there that after 10 years of this act came, that is in 1919, that means according to the Britisher, it would be 1929. So after 10 years of this act, that was 1919, a commission will be created, and that will particularly take the look at what can be done further for the development of constitutional system in this country. But as soon as 1926-27 was coming, so Britishers know that if the particular Indians would be added into the commission, then it would not be very helpful for them to control this country. So they created this commission 2 years prior, and that was in 1927. And when they were making it, they added all the Britishers only into this commission. That is why this commission was famously known as White Commission. And it came in India in February in 1928. And wherever they are going for observing the things, a particular movement was running along with them. That is the Simon Go Back movement. So let's read further now. So it extends responsible government in the provinces. Now what they are saying is that we should remove the diarchy from the center, but we should introduce the diarchy at the provincial level. That means at the state level. It established the establishment of a federation of British India and princely states. So they are also advocating one more thing, that the federal system should be introduced in this country. That means a particular federal system in which the power should be distributed between the center and the provincial level. If it advocate for continuation of communal electorate and so on. So that is the divide and rule policy, and they also recommending that it should be continued for the next some years. White paper on constitutional reforms. So this is another thing that is being said by the Simon Commission. So Simon Commission was responsible for giving certain recommendations, and after these recommendations came, on the other side, Indians were against it. So the Secretary of State at that time was Birkenhead, and he challenged the Indians to create their own constitution if they can. So at that time, Nehru Report was created, which was headed by Mr. Motilal Nehru, and that was particularly submitted to the Britishers. And now Britishers are so impatient that they want to implement the recommendation of Simon Commission as early as possible. And for that purpose, they organized the roundtable conferences about which we talked earlier in the earlier sessions. Now the next act came was Government of India Act 1935. So the act establishment of an all India federation in which governors provinces and the chief commissioners provinces and those Indian states which might accede to be united were to be included. So basically, first of all, first thing to remember that the Government of India Act 1935 came on the recommendation of Simon Commission. And if we talk about the establishment of an all India federation in which governor provinces and chief commissioner provinces and those Indian states which might accede to be united were to be included. So first of all is the all India federation, that is the point was added. Then the creation of all India federation was done by this act. Though this particular federalism or this particular all India federation was never implemented, because as after this particular act came and in 1937 the provincial elections were conducted. Finally, in 1939 the Second World War was started and Britishers never got the time to introduce the provisions of this act. The provision of division of powers, federal list, provincial list, and concurrent list was added. The viceroy was vested with residual power. This is also, once again, as you can see, they are increasing the power of Indians, but they are increasing their power 2 times, 4 times, 10 times, according to that. The provision of provincial autonomy, diarchy, was abolished at the provincial levels. Governor was head of the executive. The act advocated for diarchy at the center, federal public service commissions, federal courts, central banks. All these things were to be introduced in this country. And do remember that in 1950, the constitution that we created or that we enforced on 26 January 1950 was 75% taken from the Government of India Act 1935. One more point, and sometimes it is also called a carbon copy of Government of India Act 1935. Another point, the Government of India Act 1935 was the largest written constitution so far by the Britishers at that time. Then came the Indian Independence Act of 1947, really important. And this came after so many dialogues and so many meetings and so many things happened. So the Indian Independence Act, which was based on the Mountbatten Plan, was passed on 5th July 1947, the British Parliament, and was implemented on August 15, 1947. At that time, the British Prime Minister was Clement Attlee. The act provided for the creation of two independent dominions of India and Pakistan, which effect from 15th of August 1947. So according to this act, two dominions will be created. One is India, one is Pakistan. And in creating that, the June Plan, also known as Mountbatten Plan, also worked. Each dominion was to have a Governor General to be responsible for the effective operation of the act. The Constituent Assembly of each new dominion was to exercise the powers of the legislature of that dominion, and the existing Central Legislative Assembly and the Council of States were to be automatically dissolved. As per the provision of this act, Pakistan became independent on 14th August, while India got its freedom on 15th August 1947. Muhammad Ali Jinnah became the first Governor General of Pakistan. India, however, decided to request Lord Mountbatten to continue as the Governor General of India. So do remember that Lord Mountbatten was the first Governor General of independent India. But the very next day, he was removed and he was replaced by C. Rajgopalachari. So C. Rajgopalachari became the first Indian Governor General of independent India. And finally, in 1950, this position was abolished and the position of President of India was created, and that position went to Mr. Rajendra Prasad. So that was Indian Independence Act, and it was passed in House of Commons of London. That it was implemented on 15th August 1947 in India. Now comes the development of Indian press. Now we have learned about every important act so far that was passed by the Britishers. Now let's learn some Indian press things. So 1780, first newspaper, Bengal Gazette by James August Key. Augustus Hickey. This is really important. So first newspaper came in 1780, that was Bengal Gazette, and was introduced by James Hickey. In 1784, Calcutta Gazette was introduced, and this was another newspaper added into the system of our country. Then comes the Madras Courier, 1788. Then in 1789, the Bombay Herald was introduced. Then comes the Vernacular Press Act, 1878. Very important. This was enacted by Lord Lytton. Do you remember this one? This particular act is also known as the Gagging Act, and district magistrate was empowered to for search and seizure of deposits of any vernacular press if found publishing anything against the government or antipathy between persons of different religions, caste, race through published material. So let me tell you a bit about it. So Lord Lytton was the person who introduced this act, and vernacular means the local language. So basically, any kind of newspaper that is printing anything against the government has to be banished, and has to be prohibited from uh, putting anything. So that is why the Vernacular Press Act came in 1878, and it was passed by Lord Lytton, also known as the Gagging Act. So it was termed as the Gagging Act, as I was saying, due to discrimination between English and vernacular press, and it had no right of appeal. Why it was known as Gagging Act? Because this was only being implemented on the vernacular press. In 1882, Lord Ripon repealed the act after strong opposition from the nationalists. So Lord Ripon, who was famously known as the father of local self-government, and was the person who also started the official census of our country, he repealed the act after strong opposition from the nationalists. So do remember, Vernacular Press Act is related to two people, Lord Lytton and Lord Ripon. So do remember this development of all the different type of Indian press. Now let's read further. So Newspaper Incitement to Offences Act 1908. It aimed against extremists, nationalist activity. The act empowered a magistrate to confiscate press property which published objectionable material likely to cause incitement to a murder or acts of violence. So basically, I hope you remember that in 1907, the Surat session was held of Congress, and in that session, the Congress was divided into two parts. One is the extremists and one is the moderates. And now in 1908, as the extremists are writing a lot of things in their journals, in their newspapers, so this particular newspaper, Incitement to Offences Act, came, and under which, if anyone is found to be publishing anything against the government, their property could be seized. So this was the thing that was introduced at that time. Then comes the Indian Press Act 1910. This act revived the worst feature of the VPA. Local government was empowered to demand a security at registration from the printer, publisher, and forfeit deregister if it was an offending newspaper. And the printer of a newspaper was required to submit 2 copies of each issue to local government free of charge. So this is another act according to recorded with relation to the press. And if we talk about it, so demand of a security at a registration form and all should be done. And these are the things should be done with the local government. Indian Press Emergency Powers Act 1931. This act gave sweeping powers to provincial governments to suppress propaganda for CDM. So another thing you can see that at every time the Britishers are seeking the things that the newspapers are not working according to them, and vernacular press are doing according to the things that they want to write. So they particularly empowers the government and empowers the things that the press should not write, and um, which cannot be, the things cannot be printed in their newspapers. So these are some different acts related to the banishing of the newspapers at that time. So some other developments. So during the Second World War, under the Defense of India rules, pre-censorship was imposed, and amendments made in the Press Emergency Act and Official Secrets Act. At one time, publication of all news related to Congress activity was declared illegal. So as we know that during the Second World War, the Britishers declared that India is fighting with Britishers against the Axis powers, but they did not ask the Indians as well, especially the Indian National Congress. So because of which a lot of chaos was there, and Britishers did not want anything to be done against them. So that is why they introduced this thing that the censorship should be there, and at one time the publication of all news related to Congress activity was declared illegal. So if anything is related to Congress was to be published in the newspaper, so in that case the newspaper can be called illegal. After independence, Press Inquiry Committee, 1947, it repealed Act of 1931, modifies Section 124A and 153A. Now is the time that reforms in the cases of press was done. Press Commission under Justice G.S. Raja Dhyaksha establishment of All India Press Council, which set proper rules for the future press. So some other particular provisions added to the system of how the press should work. So this was all done after independence. Some other developments related to education. 1781, Calcutta Madras established by Calcutta Madrasa established by Warren Hastings in 1781. So madrasa is a kind of a school that is related to the Muslim community where the religious education is prominently given, and Warren Hastings was the one who established the Calcutta Madrasa. 1784, Asiatic Society of Bengal was established in 1784. The aim of this society was to foster Oriental studies in India. James Prinsep was the founding editor of the Journal of Asiatic Society of Bengal. James Prinsep was also the same person who decoded the Brahmi script, and he was the person basically who is the part of the surveys of our country, the different archaeological surveys of our country. And Asiatic Society is responsible for discovering a lot of things that were particularly buried under the soil for the last so many years. 1791, Sanskrit College established by Jonathan Duncan, resident at Banaras. 1800, Fort Williams College by Wellesley for the training of civil servants. That was Lord Wellesley. 1813, Charter Act sanctioned 1 lakh rupees annually, but it never came to effect till 1820. 1817, Calcutta College, imparting education in English, Western Humanities and Sciences. So these are some of the developments related to the education that were going at that time, and mostly in favor of the Western education to be introduced in our country, that is in India. Orientalists, Anglicists conflict. 1835, Lord Macaulay Minute. It was in favor of Anglicists. Government funding was to be devoted to Western learning. I already told you about Lord Macaulay earlier. English was decided to be the medium of instructions. And do remember, Lord Macaulay was the person who introduced the English education in this country. Mass education was neglected. Few English schools and colleges were opened to provide education to the Indians so that they can use these educated Indians in their own favor, and they can use them as a clerk and other particular jobs. They applied the downward filtration theory. They believed in educating the upper class and gradually pass on to the masses. So this was the downward filtration theory. Firstly, they educated the upper class, and they know that it will be passed on to the other people as well. 1854, Wood's Dispatch. This is really important, and do remember it is known as the Magna Carta of English education in India. So it was also known as the Magna Carta of English education in India, as I was saying, recommended government to take up education of masses, so no downward filtration. So now is the time that we should introduce universities and other things so that the masses can be educated in this country. Proper hierarchy. Vernacular primary schools at villages, followed by Anglo vernacular high schools, affiliated colleges at district level, affiliating universities at presidency levels. So vernacular means that one is the vernacular language, that is the local language, and another is the English. So this is the system introduced at that time, and still in our schools this is the system going on. If you go to different places, you will find that vernacular language along with English is the part of the curriculum that are followed in all the schools. Laid stress on female education, vocational education, teachers training. Education imparted in government institutions should be secular. From 1882 to 1883, Hunter's Commission was particularly introduced, and that is also associated with the education. Do remember that Hunter Committee and Hunter Commission, these are the two commissions, and in 1882 it was associated with education. Then Hunter Committee in 1919 was associated with the infamous Jallianwala Bagh incident. It was mainly for primary and secondary education. And do remember all these things. These are the developments done in the phases of education in our country. Some more things related to it. Recommendations. The state need to pay attention for extension and improvement of primary education. Primary education should be imparted through vernacular, that means local language. Transfer of control of primary education to newly set up district and municipal boards. Two divisions in secondary education, literary and vocational. 1904 Indian Universities Act based on Raleigh Commission 1902. Universities should focus more on study and research. 1917-1919 Sadler University Commission for the improvement of university education, improvement of secondary education was a necessary precondition. So these are some of the recommendations of the Hunter Commission, first of all. And after that, in 1904, the Universities Act came. That was the time Lord Curzon was the viceroy of our country. And Sadler University Commission was there to introduce some improvements in the secondary education and was a necessary precondition so that the further education could be given in a better way. It was set up to study and report problems of Calcutta University, but its recommendations were applicable to other universities as well. It reviewed the whole education system from school to university level. So that was the Sadler University Commission, and do remember it was introduced in 1917-1919. Before that, Indian Universities Act came in 1904, and Hunter Commission basically also recommended some things related to the education system. Some more things related to it. Hartog Committee in 1929. Primary education should be focused upon but not expanded or made compulsory. So this is the first recommendation, that primary education is to be should be focused upon but not compulsory. Only deserving students should go to high school. Rest should get vocational training after 8th grade. Admissions to universities should be restricted for better efficiency. 1937 Varda scheme of basic education was given. INC organized National Conference on Education in Varda. Based on the resolution, Zakir Hussain Committee formulated a detailed scheme. Overall system based on Gandhi's ideas published in Weekly Harijan. Inclusion of basic handicraft in the syllabus. First 7 years of education free, compulsory, and in the mother tongue. 1944 Sargent Plan of Education, educational advisor to government, aimed at making Indian education as par with European education. So first of all, Hartog Committee was introduced in 1929, and according to them, only the deserving candidate should go to the students should go to the high school and get vocational training after 8th grade admission. So basically this was done according to Hartog Committee. Then comes the Varda scheme of basic education. And basically this was introduced by INC, that is Indian National Congress, and majorly focused on the education of Indians. So based on the resolution, Zakir Hussain Committee formulated a detailed scheme. Overall system based on Gandhi's idea published in Weekly Harijan. Inclusion of basic handicrafts in the syllabus. First 7 years of education free, compulsory, and in mother tongue only. Aimed at making Indian education on par with European education. This was the recommendation of Sargent Plan of Education. So this was all done under this all basic things. Then comes the tribal movements. So if we talk about the tribal movements, so we need to learn that in which particular uprisings, what type of things that were demanded from the tribes. So first was in 1776, that is Chuar uprisings. Midnapur Aboriginal tribesmen organized a protest over land revenue demands and economic misery. So basically, you will find that all the major tribal movements were on the basis of land revenues and economic misery. So the first one was Chuar uprising, and in Midnapur, or Aboriginal. Aboriginal basically means the indigenous people, tribesmen. So they protested over land revenue. Then comes 1778, Paharia's rebellion. It was headed by Raja Jagannath, who led Paharias of Rajmahal Hills against British expansion on their land. So we know that Britishers are expanding themselves in different regions, but when they go to the tribal areas, so in tribal areas, they found that lot of uprisings were taken against them. Then 1818 to 1831 and 1913, Bhil uprising. Bhil Raj was created on the Western Ghat in opposition of the company's control, reorganized under Govind Guru in 1913 to fight for Bhil Raj. Then comes 1820 to 1837, Ho and Munda uprising by Ho tribal led by Raja Parahat in Singhbum and Chota Nagpur region against new farming revenue policy. This later became the Munda rebellion. So Munda rebellion is basically, I hope you understand that this is related to Birsa Munda, and basically it is related to the Jharkhand area, that is the Singhbum area and Chota Nagpur region. Some other movements. 1822 to 1829, Ramosi uprising by the Ramosi tribals of Western Ghats under Chittur Singh against Britishers' occupation of the region. So this was done. Then 1829, Koli uprising. In 1829-1839, the tribals in Gujarat and Maharashtra rose against the company's authority. Then 1832, Kol rebellion. Tribal of Chota Nagpur under Buddho Bhagat revolted against Britishers and moneylenders. 1837 to 1856, Khond rebellion. Chakra Bisoi led an uprising of hill tribes from Tamil Nadu to Bengal against interference in tribal rituals and the imposition of new levies. 1855 to 1856, Santhal rebellion. Very important, guys. Do remember this one. Tribal of Bihar led by Sido and Kanu against moneylenders and zamindars. This had been asked so many times. So this was the time of 1855 to 1856. Then 1868, Nai Kada movement. The tribals of Madhya Pradesh and Gujarat against the British and caste Hindus to establish Dharam Raj. Some other movements. 1870s, Kharwar rebellion. So tribals of Bihar led by Bagrit Majhi against revenue settlement activities. Then 1867, Bhuyan and Juang rebellions. Tribes of Kionjar, Odisha revolted twice in 1867 and 1891. 1899 to 1900, Munda rebellion. Tribals in Chota Nagpur revolted against the Dikus under the leadership of Bhagwan Birsa Munda. Then 1879 to 1880, Koya uprising. The tribals of the eastern Godavari region led by Toma Sora and Raja Anantyar revolted against the police and moneylenders. Then in 1910, Bastar revolt by tribals of Jagdalpur against new feudal and forest levies. 1914 to 1919, Tana Bhagat movement. Chota Nagpur's tribals led by Jatra Bhagat and Balram Bhagat revolted against outsiders' intrusion. 1921 to 1922, Chenchu's uprising. Tribals of Nalamala Hills led by K. Hanumantu revolted against the British forest laws. 1922 to 1944, Rampa rebellion led by Aluri Sitaraman Raju of Koyas, Andhra Pradesh against the British interference. So you can see that these are the basic rebellions of tribal areas. Northeastern frontier tribal movements. 1828 to 1833, Ahom's revolt. So Ahom was a kingdom that was famous during Aurangzeb also. In Assam, people are protesting the failure of Britishers to keep their pledge to leave their territory after the Burmese War. 1830s Khasis revolt, led by Tirath Singh in the hills of Jaintia and Garo against the corruption of their region. 1830s Singh Force rebellion in Assam against corruption of their region by Britishers. Cookies revolt, important one, in Manipur against British policies of recruiting labor during World War. Then 1920, Zelia Ang Song movement. Manipur tribes protested the British inability to protect them against the Kuki uprising. Then comes the 1905 1931 to 1931 Naga movement by tribals of Manipur, led by Jadonang against British rule and to form Nagraj. So these are some of the uprisings and tribal movements happened in the 19th and 20th century. Some peasant movement. Peasant means farmer movements from 1857 to 1947. Narkil Biria uprising 1831. Location 24 Parganas, Bengal. Titu Mir inspired the Muslim tenants in West Bengal to rise against the Hindu landlord. So this was a kind of a rent dispute that is between the Muslim tenants and the Hindu landlords, or you can say the particular dispute between the tenants and the landlords. Then the Faraizi revolt 1838 to 1857. Leader Haji Sharait Allah and Dadu Mian. It supported the cause of peasants against zamindars, also wanted to overthrow the Britishers. Then Pagal Panthis, very important guys, 1820s to 1840s. Leader Karam Shah and Tipu, and it was against zamindari oppression, religious and political motives. It captured lot of areas and this area remained disturbed for almost 2 decades. So these are some of the movements related to the peasants, and do remember all these ones. Some other peasant movements. Indigo Revolt, very important. It was directed against the British, who forced peasants to sign contracts which forced them to grow indigo even when it was not profitable to them. Do remember, the indigo cultivation was introduced by a Frenchman, Louis Bernard, and it was introduced in 1777. And during the Indigo Revolt, Neel Darpan was written by Deenbandhu Mitra to create awareness about what exactly the indigo cultivation is. Rebellion organized under the leadership of Digambar Biswas and Vishnu Biswas of Nadia district. Peasants were supported by the intelligentsia of Bengal. Neel Darpan, a play, was written by Deenbandhu Mitra based on this agitation. It was the first Satyagraha movement in modern India. Pabna Revolt. Zamindar enhanced rent from tenants from acquiring occupancy under Act 10 of 1859. Peasants from agrarian association to resist the demands of the zamindars. So this is again an important rebellion against the zamindars from the tenants, who are basically the working peasants in the land areas. In 1885, Bengal Tenancy Act was passed, which solved the major issues. This was supported by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee, the one who wrote Anand Math, then R.C. Dutt and Surendranath Banerjee. So these are all some of the related issues of peasant revolts at that time. Then Rangpur Dhing in 1783. The Rangpur rebellion occurred in Bengal. It is known as the first hard peasant insurrection against the East India Company's control. It clearly exposed the horror associated with the colonial exploitation system, such as the Izara Dari plan, that is a type of a revenue system introduced by Britishers. It paved the way for formulating a land settlement that would be permanent in nature, the permanent settlement that was introduced by Lord Cornwallis later. The rebellion spread over a significant area, including Ranchi, Hazaribagh, Palamau, and Manbhum. After 2 years of strong confrontation, they lost 2 modern weapons of the Britishers. Mapila Rebellion in Malabar, 1841 to 1920. So the Mapila insurrection was a series of rebellions by the Mapila Muslims of Kerala, Malabar's area. The major cause were an increase in land tax, a lack of tenure security, and landlord exploitation of the poor peasantry. So basically, tenants means that the farmers who are working on the landlord's land. So they have no security of their land, and on the other side, they have to pay taxes, the increased taxes, and landlord exploitation is there. So that is why this rebellion happened. The revolt goes fell into the trap of Hindu-Muslim riot. So firstly, it was a landlord and tenant dispute, but later it became a riot between Hindu and Muslims. So this was also basically a very famous rebellion or a riot happened in Kerala. Then Rangpur Ding 1783. So during the period, there was a Khilafat movement was raised for the fulfillment of freedom of Muslims for Muslims. The 1921 rebellion was an expression of long-standing agriculture discontent, which was only exacerbated by their religious and ethnic differences as well as their political estrangement. The rebellion was suppressed thoroughly and largely shadowed by that of the other rebellions. Deccan Uprisings, 1875. So, after reading about the Mopla revolt, now let's read further. The British expanded their foothold outside Bengal with the permanent settlement. The revenue system implemented in the Bombay Deccan region was Raitwadi. So there were three types of system. One is permanent settlement, another one is the Raitwadi, and third one was the Mailwadi. Mailwadi system was basically introduced in the central Indian region. Permanent settlement was basically introduced in the Bengal and Bihar region. The revolt started in Pune and henceforth it spread to Ahmednagar. This uprising also involved a social boycott of the moneylender. And these are some of the other important uprisings happened at that time. Then Te Bhaga movement in 1946-1947. In the mid 1940s, the Te Bhaga movement emerged in undivided Bengal. This movement centers around a demand for Te Bhaga 2/3 shares by sharecroppers of their produce for themselves instead of one half traditionally given to them by the Jotidars, a class of intermediary landowners. The colonial rulers utilized all available oppressive tactics to bring this movement to a halt, including imposing a reign of terror in rural regions. Telangana movement 1946-1952. Andhra Pradesh Telangana movement 1946-1952 battled against the authorities and local landowners' feudal oppression. The agrarian social structure of Hyderabad emerged to be very oppressive in the 1920s and thereafter. In rural Telangana's political economy, the Jagirdars and Deshmukhs, locally known as Dora, played a dominant role. So this was against a particular type of people who are taking the control of these areas, the Jagirdars and the Deshmukhs. And this was the Telangana movement. Remember the years especially of all these movements because that would be asked directly in the exams. Then Kisan Sabha movement. So United Province Kisan Sabha, it is founded by Gauri Shankar Mishra and Indra Narayan Dwivedi. Awadh Kisan Sabha 1920, it is founded by Baba Ramchandra. Eka movement 1921, region of revolt. Some northern districts of the United Provinces, Hardoi, Bahreich, Sitapur, Eka movement involved a symbolic religious rituals in which the assembled peasants took vows that pay only recorded rent, not leave when evicted, refuse to do forced labor, not help criminals, abide by panchayat decisions. This was led under the leadership by Madari Pasi. So this was the Ika movement and it particularly took place in the Hardoi, Bahreich and Sitapur regions of the United Province. Remember where it held, it was happened. Then Mapila revolt or Mopla revolt, or famously known name is Mopla revolt. Mopla were Muslim cultivators of South Malabar who were generally taken as Jamis or Janmi, bonded labor by Nambodri upper caste Hindu landlords. So that was the Mopla revolt happened between the landlords and the Moplas. Later it became a Hindu Muslim riot at that time. Some other movements. Polygars, very important. Dindigul, Malabar, and our North Arcot began revolting against the company's land revenue system during 1790. The pricing continued in Madras Presidency up to 1856. Bardoli Satyagrah, and this was led by Sardar Patel. The woman of Bardoli gave with Vallabhbhai Patel the title of Sardar. And do remember that during this movement, this Satyagraha, the Sardar, the Vallabhbhai Patel was there to provide a Satyagraha against the uprising of the taxes, even in the cases of drought in the Bardoli area, that is in Gujarat. So that was Bardoli Satyagraha 1928, and a woman of Bardoli gave the title Sardar. And that's it in this session, guys. I hope you learned a lot of things regarding the administrative system of Britishers, regarding the tribal movements, regarding the tribal rebellions and peasant movements of the pre-independence era. So I will meet you in the next session in which we will discuss some more things related to the modern history. And till the time we meet, bye bye. Take care, everyone, and see you soon.